All right, welcome into episode 28 of Destination the Show. My name is JD Cameron here, as always, with Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's going on,
What's
man?
up? Just enjoying the spring weather here as we fastly approach opening day with all of Scott Boris's clients still free agents.
Good call, man. It is beautiful outside. And I can't believe that there are still like 15 spring training games to go. It never ends, dude. I'm
It
so
doesn't.
bored of it. I hate it. Um, But last week we were talking about one of your kiddos being on the way to the state basketball tournament. So we got to start with a quick recap.
Yeah, so we played the first game of the tournament in the Wisconsin State girls tournament
Okay,
and ran into the eventual state champs. And so
that'll happen.
the the tournament participating was short lived, but cool experience, first time ever for the high school to make it that far. Um, and it's neat. I mean, Green Bay is not somewhere that Western Wisconsin travels to often.
Yep.
So even after the games are done, being able to take in, some of the cool things around the Resch Center. I mean, the Resch Center is essentially the parking lot to Lambeau Field,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of cool stuff that's happened to Lambeau since the last time I was there. So it's just neat. It's really cool. It's exciting for the kids, exciting for the community to see everybody travel over and support a team, and that's what high school sports is about. I mean, it brings the community together. So even if you don't fare as well as you'd necessarily like to, it's still a pretty cool experience.
Yes, sir. Awesome. Well, congrats to her. Glad you guys had a good time. Some quick housekeeping stuff, man. Before there's definitely a couple of topics I want to touch on before we dig into the main chunk of today's show. But real quick housekeeping, you can find us on YouTube at Destination the Show, on Twitter at DTS_pod1. Give us a follow over there. That's where we put out a lot of clips from the show. And wherever you get your podcasts, you can support the show by downloading episodes, liking and subscribing, interacting with our content wherever possible. And we appreciate it in advance. All right, man. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is spring breakout is right around the corner, coming up this weekend, and the Twins are playing the Rays, the Brewers are playing the Royals, and the Cubs are playing the White Sox. So I want to ask you first, before we talk about some of the prospects we might see, how do you feel about this spring breakout idea that MLB is putting together for the first time this year?
Well, I think it's cool from the perspective of it gives someone like you who's annoyed by the length of spring training a reason to watch a game, right?
That's true.
But also for people that read Baseball America's Prospect Handbook and follow the draft closely and have heard names, but maybe don't have the ability to watch these players.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Essentially, it's going to serve as like minor league organizational all-star games, right? And like even minor league all-star games, it's like those guys are all-stars. They're not prospects, but these are like the prospect all-stars. And so it's neat from the vantage point that you look at the list of players and it's the guys that we talk about.
Yeah,
And
it
so
is.
it'll be cool to see how they fare, in the game, but also if guys look really, really good, it's like futures game on an organizational level. And
Yeah.
that's neat, and it's going to give people a reason to turn off maybe a conference tournament and turn on a baseball game. So that to me is a super cool idea, and hopefully it's something that sticks around.
Yeah, for sure. I hope so too. Um, Honestly, so we talked about this last week, right? And I was already grumbling about spring training, the length of spring training last week. And you spoke a lot about it's a big difference when you go. For me, like I've always heard the best time to go, right, is close to the beginning of spring training. You maybe have better access to players, backfields, so on and so forth before it gets really, really busy with the games. But this would honestly be an influencing factor for me going down there to see this game in a spring training trip would be pretty cool because it's basically, like you said, it's a who's who of teams' top prospects. So,
So you have 3 days to book the flight.
yeah, right. Yeah, right. I gotta book my PTO from kid duty months in advance, my friend. You know
That's
that.
fair. That's fair.
Um, But let's talk about some of the guys, man. So, we've got some notables here from the Twins, Brewers, and Cubs. Yeah, let's just start with the Twins. We have them listed out. Anyone in particular from their roster who you are super jazzed to see in action?
I think it'll probably be a consistent theme here. The guys like Walker Jenkins and Charlie Soto, who haven't really played a ton professionally, but also haven't played against the higher level prospects.
Yep.
And I mean, I'm not looking at the Rays roster, but it's like I see right here on the Cubs roster, Cade Horton, which means you're going to be playing against potentially the best pitching prospects in baseball. And how is a guy that's 9 months, 10 months removed from graduating high school going to fare against guys that are knocking on the door of the major league? And so Jenkins, Soto, those are fun names. Mark Raya, how is he going to fare? How are they going to unleash him? Is it going to be a 1-inning All-Star game type appearance? Is it
Gotta be.
Is it going to be the typical 2-inning Marco Raya appearance? We don't know, right?
We don't know
what something's going to be. So, for the Twins, it's those guys that were, that are the recent draft picks. But on the flip side of that, how are the David Festas and the Brooks Lees going to fare? The expectation should be that they dominate against lower level minor leaguers, right?
The funny part of it is, dude, I can't wait to see the irritating overreactions of like Walker Jenkins like grounds out in like his 2 plate appearances and everyone's all annoyed about it. But 100% they should, but like the sample size is going to be completely worthless. So
when Erod goes up and watches 9 strikes and maybe hacks at 2 of them, misses strike 3 times.
It's the begin. He's already been optioned to Double-A. It's the beginning of his Double-A adjustment period is now. So
Twins cut Erod yesterday.
Yeah, Go ahead.
It's the verbiage, right? I mean, that's what you cut them from camp. I remember seeing that as a kid, like seeing it when I was younger. Like you hear these names, and then it's like the Twins cut him, and in every other sport that means they're gone,
right?
Not necessarily cut to the minor league team. So I had to send you that message after it happened.
No, Jeremy sent me a snarky text about Erod being cut, aka a 21-year-old starting the season in Double-A, which is great. And for the record, I expect him to have a difficult time in his first month or 2 of Double-A. So let's get out in front of that before it starts.
It's going to start on Saturday, the roughness.
Yeah, I'm excited. Okay, I'm gonna go a different direction just to mix things up a little bit. So the Twins outfield is really nice, right? You've got Walker Jenkins, Erod, Gabriel Gonzalez. I'm really interested to see because it's going to be our first look at him since he was acquired from the Mariners, but also Kalai Rosario, and I think Jose Rodriguez rounds out the group of 5. I would stack the Twins outfield group up against any outfield group probably of any org. So I think those would be my picks for the Twins. How about the Brewers, man? Anyone? I think I can predict where you're going to go with this, but anyone you're really excited to see on the Brewers roster?
Just looking at this list, I mean, we've talked so much about the Brewers prospects, right? And it's a lot of the names that we've talked about from the guys that we think could be sneaky good, right? Your pick, Logan Henderson's on there.
Yeah.
Bishop Letson being a late round high school guy.
Yep.
That got a decent bonus that's on the list. Like that's a sneaky one because you wouldn't expect him to be on the list.
Yep.
Obviously, Mizorowski on the list is going to be fun. Josh Noth is going to be fun. Pratt, Batonti, like, come on. These are
so fun. The Brewers roster is the most fun for me, for sure.
Yeah. Brock Wilken. I mean, all of them, like that roster's stacked.
Yeah, that's so good.
And so I look forward. It's the one-on-ones, right? It's the World Baseball Classic ending with Ohtani and Trout, and it's like, how is X hitter gonna do against Y pitcher? And there's going to be all these different matchups, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be all-star game level times 15.
Yep.
From 15 games. So
yep.
Lots of names there that I really like, and even Eric Brown not being mentioned, but former first-round pick who is still a prospect. Like it's going to be fun. It's
so much fun. Really if there's a bigger roster mismatch than the Brewers against the Royals, who don't have maybe have a fringe fringe top 100 prospect the Royals do. I don't know what it is. Because like you said, the Brewers roster is absolutely loaded. I love the Letson pick. The Brewers love drafting a high school guy who plays baseball in the Midwest late in the draft and paying him a bunch. I'm really excited to see him this year. Noth is my other guy, I think, from the Brewers. I just want to see his curveball. Just throw a few, walk off the mound, and we're all set. I'll be satisfied.
I hope that all these stadiums are equipped with the best technology, so we get information from these games.
Just like all the spring training games, you mean?
Like, oh, that looked fast. How hard was it? No idea.
No clue. Oh, it's so bad. That's so bad. But 5% more effort into spring training statistics and information, please. Major League Baseball. Signed every baseball fan.
Everybody.
Any Cubs you're jazzed to see who are playing the White Sox, by the way, who have new additions to their farm system who aren't going to make this game, I'm guessing, but we should talk about them in a minute too. Anyone from the Cubs roster stand out for you?
Cade Horton's going to be super fun. Matt Shaw. Love Matt Shaw. A little surprised that PCA is on the roster.
He's been optioned to AAA already, so he's not starting.
Weird. That's weird to me. Like, Chirio's not on the roster, so yeah, that's. I mean, Bellinger's re-addition obviously makes things different, but we've talked so much about the Cubs, and it's like these are all guys, almost exclusively guys, knocking on the door.
Yeah,
like that's a AAA team right there with prospects. So that's a little bit different than the other ones. I tend to go towards the young dudes, and they don't really have them. Trianos is fun.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a stacked team.
Yeah, it is. That's another on paper roster mismatch. The Cubs against the White Sox and the Brewers against the Royals is, especially the Brewers against the Royals, is not really fair. No. Speaking of which, I got MLB alerts on my phone. So let's talk about this real quick.
Okay.
Real time. The San Diego Padres and their ever interesting GM AJ Preller have traded for White Sox ace Dylan Cease, giving up right-handed pitcher Drew Thorpe, right-handed pitcher Jairo Iriarte, outfielder Samuel Zavala, and right-handed pitcher Steven Wilson. Big trade. Reportedly, I think the Yankees were interested in Cease with Cole maybe injured, the Rangers too, possibly the Giants as well. So any like initial, I'm putting you on the spot here, but any initial reactions to this trade that you would care to share?
So I guess my initial reaction was I saw Cease to the Padres, and then the names it was a long time, right? And so it's like you know the big names for the Padres. Ethan Salas is the big name. He wasn't getting moved, right? Jackson Merrill is potentially starting at center field for them.
Yep.
He wasn't getting moved. Dylan Lesko, freak, he's not getting moved. DeVries just signed. He's not getting moved. They basically traded all of their other guys, right? Aside from the ones that I knew the best. And they've really done a good job of protecting their top prospects. And so I think Thorpe, did I see he was rated like 85th somewhere?
Yeah.
But he's had a really, really good spring. That they didn't give up a ton as far as like high-end top prospects in the game, but they did really deplete their system as far as guys that, like I mentioned, the top two weren't going to go anywhere. I didn't imagine Lesko's going to go anywhere. That, according to MLB, that leaves Robbie Snelling really from their top five. And so I think the from a how much value on each side, I feel like the White Sox got quite a bit. However, 2 years of an ace pitcher should get you a ton, right? Yeah. And so that's where I'm kind of stuck.
Yeah. I feel like it's a little bit like it's a volume trade, right? So I think we can liken it a little bit to the Jorge Polanco trade, right? Between the Twins and Mariners, in that the Twins got like a lot of volume that added up to good value from that. Although that's obviously different because you're talking about major league and minor league pieces. I've seen like reactions like freaking out either way. I was like a bit perturbed when it was first tweeted out that it was just Thorpe and Iriarte, and I thought that was light. But I think if you're the White Sox, you have like a middling to bottom middle tiered farm system. They're probably in like the 15 to 20 range, maybe on most lists. So you can afford to either target volume or upside. And I don't think that matters a ton. I agree with you 100%. Like, I would bet that the White Sox were targeting one of those two arms towards the upper end of the Padres system, and they didn't get one of them. So yay, Padres. But I would here's the thought exercise I went through. Let's compare this for a second to the Corbin Burnes trade, right? Now, Corbin Burnes is a better pitcher than Dylan Cease. I think that's fairly inarguable. However, Dylan Cease has 2 years of team control. So I also think it's fair to say that like total value, Dylan Cease is worth more. I'll take 2 years of Dylan Cease over 1 year of Corbin Burnes. Agree or disagree, I guess, with that logic?
100% agree.
Okay. So for Corbin Burnes, the Brewers got 2 back-end top 100 prospects and the number 34 overall pick. Would you rather have that return, or would you rather have the return the White Sox got for Cease, regardless of who the pitcher was being traded? I think you could like give a decent argument for both sides of that, which is what makes me feel like it's a decent deal for the Padres.
So the part for me that makes it really tough to distinguish between the two is the Brewers are not necessarily tearing it down and rebuilding. And so they got 2 prospects that are close, right? And pretty highly regarded, going to be, I mean, it's no guarantee, but should be impact Major League Baseball players, right? Which is there's a ton of value in that, and a first round pick. The Padres dealing Drew Thorpe and the other guys who are, I mean, Thorpe is 23. You look at the the White Sox system right now, and it's not good, and they're not good. So it makes sense to target more of these higher ceiling, lower floor, to go with the Colson Montgomery. So Colson Montgomery is their best prospect. He's 22, right? But then you look at like on MLB, it's like 22, 20, 22, 20, 21. Then they have a couple pitchers that are 24 and 25, 23, 22. And then it's just all young dudes. And so I feel like you can just, if you can add, like you said, volume to that organization, it makes more sense than going after the type of return that the Brewers got.
Yep.
And so that's why I think it's so polarizing, because of just where those two teams are. Like the Brewers weren't going to take low-level dudes based on where they are in terms of thinking they can contend.
For
and
sure.
I just don't think the White Sox are anywhere near being able to contend. And if they have more guys to trade, they should probably do that too. Right?
Agreed. 100%. How long till the White Sox sign Michael Lorenzen to fill Dylan Cease's rotation spot, or has it already happened? Like that's happening, right? They're going to sign like a 1 year, $8 million guy to fill that spot. Sure.
Or do they have money where they just say how much is Snell going to need, and we'll just give it to him and then flip him at the deadline and get some young guys out of the deal?
Interesting. I don't think they're smart like that, but we'll see. Yeah, super interesting. I feel like a trade at this kind of portion of spring training is unusual. So
it should feel like that, but I mean, you think back and it's like didn't the Padres do this with Kimbrel? Didn't the Padres do this with?
My memory's terrible. So
Paddock, like
that's
this
true.
is what they do.
That was like the eve of opening day, even.
Hey, we're gonna set our opening day rosters, and the GM sitting over there, and he's like, "Hold my beer, let's make a move." Which is it's AJ Preller. You never know, which is fun. I mean, if he was the GM of my team, I just wouldn't like prospects too much, and would just love to see the wheeling and dealing. So, anywho, I feel like it's time to move on to what we're gonna do today, and that's talk about the draft, and you've been
Yeah, it's the first one, dude. I can't wait.
and you've been like way more into what's going on here. It's March, right? The draft is in the month of
July.
July. So we're 4 months, maybe almost like 4 months exactly, a third
About
of the
that.
year, and we're going to talk about the top of that draft. So I don't have this fancy consensus draft board in front of me. What I do have is MLB.com's
Okay. Oh Lord.
list. Okay, and
About to get taken to task.
before we get into this, we've talked a lot about last year's draft,
Mhm.
right? Um, but now we fast forward. We're looking at this new draft. It's the 2024 draft class. How is that class? How does it compare to last year's class?
Mhm.
And like, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses?
Right on. I'm so excited to be doing this with you, dude. Because before I dig into this, just real quick, we texted in July 1st of last year about starting a podcast about the draft. And here's
Sure.
us like really digging in for the first time. Anyway, how is this class and how does it compare to the last class? I mean, like the headline is that it's not as good, simply, right? 2023 was a coming together of a lot of weird things all at once. So it was an outstanding prep class in 2023. It was also a college class that was bloated by COVID shortening the 2020 draft significantly. Um, so that's like an unusual coming together, and that draft last year I think is gonna turn out to be the best one in like 15 years. We'll
Mhm.
see. So it's not as good, but I also don't think that's surprising. I do think like overall 2024 might end up being much more interesting in a way, right? Um, because there are questions about every single guy at the top of the pile, and there is a significant lack of up the middle players, specifically shortstops. Like there are not really any college shortstops in this class, so much so that guys are moving from second base to shortstop to like fill that void. And if we think back to last year, there was close to a consensus top 5 right from the jump, right? The only real big change was Chase Dolander got bumped down and Paul Skeens ended up ascending all the way to number 1. Here, it's a mess. There is a good deep like crop of college talent, I think, like through about the end of day 1, so through like 40 picks. I think it's really interesting, with a caveat again that this is like super, super early and a lot of this is probably going to change. But I guess the headline that I would share with you from the like initial write-ups I've done is this is not the year that I would be pining for a top 8 or a top 10 pick. Just not as much impact talent. I think especially on the high school side. The high school position player side is particularly weak this year. But again, it's March, as you mentioned. We have a quarter of a year to go. So all of that with the giant caveat that it's too early.
Yeah, and so the one thing that I like to always kind of think about, which is the first thing that comes to mind when you say this isn't a year that I'd be pining for a top 8 pick.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the kind of the tomfoolery starts, right? Where you try to stretch your dollars to get that guy that you like for that amount, so you can also get that guy later.
Yep.
And we've seen that in the past. Last year the top 5 was played pretty normal, right? Because there was a top 5 and people were being drafted from it. So that to me is where this at this point looks really interesting. So
100%.
next question then, because you're not pining for a top 8 pick, what does the top of this class look like? And are there names that are definitely going to go in the top 8? How many guys in the conversation for 1-1?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's worth doing this part and like over several different questions, right? Because maybe it's worth starting with like kind of like who are the names in the mix preseason, because it was like a cluster of guys preseason, mostly college guys that were kind of mentioned at the top of the draft, right? So you have JJ Weatherholt, and we'll talk more about these guys and their numbers and what their tools are and all that stuff. You have JJ Weatherholt, who had typically played second base, college infielder from West Virginia. Nick Kurtz from Wake Forest, big power hitting first baseman. Travis Bazzana, another middle infielder who plays for Oregon State, second baseman mostly at the moment. And then Jack Caglianone, probably the most famous returning college player off the back of just like a real monster 2023 season where Florida went to the College World Series and ended up losing out to LSU. I think the headline for me at the moment is there is no clear consensus number one. And I think, as this conversation goes on, what we're going to hear is, as we talk about these guys and their skills and their opportunities to improve, there's a number of other dudes kind of making their way into the mix and making this even more kind of cloudy just based on the first quarter of the college season. But I do think this is an interesting time to have this first discussion, right? Because right now we're slightly ahead of where all these industry places are going to drop their first major draft boards. So you're like Baseball America, Prospects Live, Keith Law, Kylie McDaniel, all those guys. They're going to drop their first boards or first updated boards at the end of March, beginning of April. And I think we're going to see a lot of movement in the top 10 and even kind of in the top 3.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you the question that I have right now, but I do have a wonderful question, because actually I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna give you time to think about it, because we talked a lot about how 2023 set up and how the top was the top, and it didn't really have a lot of changes. But if you go back 1 year prior to that, 2022, at this point in time, if we would have had this conversation, the number one overall pick, who's now the number one prospect in baseball, wasn't even he was a thought because his name was familiar, but he was probably sitting outside the top 20, maybe outside the top 30, and then all the way up to number one on some boards, number two on boards, and number one overall in the draft. So the question that I'm going to have for you later is there a guy that's further down the board right now that you could see making that move? You know what I mean?
That's a fun
but I don't want to
question.
put you on the spot, and I'm gonna let you think about it here while we go on
to
the next one. So you mentioned these names, right? And so the names that are very familiar, like you mentioned, Weatherholt, Kurtz, which I always found funny because you're not putting a power hitting first baseman on the top line and drafting him if you know what's going on, because you're gonna try him over in a different position, right?
Right.
Because the last place that you're going to put a guy in the defensive spectrum is first base. Seems silly to tie all that value in $8 million plus, right?
Spencer Torkelson.
And what they do, they moved him to third base.
Right.
Gave it a shot. So the guys like Weatherholt, Kurtz, Bazzana, how have they started? How have they held their spot?
Yeah.
Or when you see these changes, are they going to be moving significantly?
Yeah.
At this point.
For sure. And that's a really great question. And I also I've been going back and forth, right, on how folks are going to react to performance, because I think there not being a kind of clear consensus number one guy, I do think that's going to maybe lend itself to some more reaction and movement from industry boards, right? But the headlines are, I think, for Weatherholt, he was pretty much the consensus number one guy coming into the season. He's only appeared in 4 games. He's been injured. He has a hamstring injury. It was reported to be mild. He hasn't been seen since. He moved from second base to shortstop this year, which is potentially impactful if he can handle it well, but we have seen no evidence of that because he really hasn't played, right? The headline tools are incredible bat to ball skills. He had his own whiff of under 7% in 2023. It's almost unbelievable. Just a really, really great 60 grade hit tool. I think he will for sure maintain his spot in the top 3, top 5, but I would imagine he will fall off this top spot in people's updates because out of sight, out of mind a little bit.
Yep, that's fair.
we'll talk about Kurtz next, who is interesting, right? Because to your point, he's played pretty much exclusively first base. He is a really good defensive first baseman, so he has that going for him. But to your point also, there's nowhere to move a guy like that. And there's several dudes in this draft class that have just like not a ton of defensive value while having other really interesting tools. And it's one of the things that I think is kind of limiting about this class overall. Kurtz is off to like a slow start, but he's really just not, he's getting pitched around a ton. Like he's getting pitched around or is getting breaking pitches. He's not getting fastballs. So far, when I pulled numbers, he was hitting 245, 474 on base, which is great. Only a 453 slug, 3 home runs, 23 walks already. And this is through like 14, 15 games and only 12 Ks, right? So offensively, he does everything well. Potentially plus hit, plus power, good approach, good plate discipline, absolutely crushes the ball, right? So max exit velocity is like 117, but like first base only profile. What does that really look like? Yeah, I kind of agree. Like Spencer Torkelson is like, now he's starting to play well, hit 30 home runs last year. That's somewhat exciting, but the offense has to be so good for that pick to be worthwhile. And college hitters with that profile, I don't think have that great of a track record.
I would agree.
So like he was like 1 through 3 on a lot of boards. I think he's gonna move down into the 5 to 10 range. That's my guess. And again, like who's to say whether that's too reactionary or not? I think Bazana is the one who's really excelled so far. I think he's going to be number 1 on most boards on updates. He's hitting 450, 588, 900, 3 doubles, 3 triples, 6 home runs, 19 walks. He's hitting the ball harder this year, 110 mile per hour, 90th exit velocity. Only chasing 13% of the time. He has a really great offensive profile. Good bat to ball skills, doesn't expand the strike zone, really good runner. He's an okay second baseman, like a really great athlete, but not a great arm. But I think the interesting question for him is people have been talking about maybe he's a better fit in center field. And if he can do that and he has that offensive profile in center field, that is a completely different value proposition than if he is a like fringe average defensive second baseman. So I think he's the guy that's going to kind of rise to the top out of those 3.
Yeah. Now he was it him against Hagen Smith or him against, is that who they played? Did Oregon State play?
Yep.
And he struck out, was it 3 times against Hagen Smith?
Yep.
So I think we're going to talk about him in a little bit.
We are.
So how about this? You talked about the top 3 and where they're going to go. You're dropping guys out of the top 5, which means you also have to now bring guys into the top 5.
Yeah.
Who are the guys that have moved into your top 3 with solid starts to the season?
Okay. I'm going to give you like not just like a solid start to the season. I'm going to give you a like incredible start to the season. Charlie Condon plays for Georgia. And I'm not going to give you a defensive position because I think it's really, really up in the air where that is. But how's this for a line? 569. That's his batting average. 670. And the slug is 1.308. 13 home runs, 7 doubles, a triple, 18 walks, and 10 Ks. That's through like 15 games. He has turned into, so preseason, he was definitely seen as a like power over hit tool. But he's just mashing everything. His 90th percentile exit velocity is 112 miles per hour. He's cut his swing and miss significantly, so the hit tool is like really improved. 2 big questions for him. 1, he hasn't played anyone good yet. He hasn't faced any good pitching. And the SEC conference schedule is a gauntlet. Right. Like he's going to get LSU and he's going to get Vanderbilt and he's going to get Arkansas. Like he's just going to be facing dudes. So there's no way he's sustaining this, but can he keep up the output against that really, really good pitching? And then secondly, again, just like Kurtz, where's the defensive home? He's played third base. He's played a couple of games in center field. Didn't look great in center field. Looked okay at third base. He's played first base. I do think he's like athletic enough to be a corner outfielder, like a left fielder, which I think if he keeps up the offense makes him at least like more of a certain and high value defensive profile than Kurtz at first base. But he's just been unbelievable. If you get a chance to watch him, insane.
So the thing about him though is you mentioned all 4 corner spots as a potential home. So that's where you end up when you do have the offensive profile.
Yep.
And if you're serviceable at a couple of those spots, even if he's not going to have an OPS of 2000, right? He still can do it. Like he can still play any of those spots. If he's a serviceable third baseman defensively and can hit, he's fine. If he can hit and play either outfield spot, he's fine. In the event that he can hit and can't play, then he ends up at first. But that's a lot of rungs to step down.
For sure.
The thing for me that's interesting about him, and you maybe have some more to add to this, he was a preferred walk-on, redshirted, because according to the bio, wasn't physically ready, but then turns it on and becomes the SEC Freshman of the Year. So, I mean, it's not like he hasn't performed in the SEC. He hasn't performed in the SEC this year.
Yep, 100%. And so you're absolutely right. Like he redshirted, which is not common in college baseball. Basically, I think the story is he was like 175 pounds as a preferred walk-on. So he just like did not have playing strength. Got in the weight room, but on like 35 pounds over the course of a year. Like you said, mashed, was SEC Freshman of the Year. So you're absolutely right. Like he does have a track record. I think the separator is the hit tool, and his bat to ball skills have improved so markedly in this small sample size. And that would be the one thing I would be monitoring, right? To say, is this a like top 3 profile or more of a like 5 to 15 profile? Is can he keep the bat to ball, the good bat to ball skills up against higher quality pitching? And if he can, you're talking about like potentially an above average or plus hit tool to go with like the double plus power, and then the defensive position becomes less of a concern. And I think with his defense, it's more like more reps needed as opposed to is a butcher, you know? So at third base, he looked a little awkward, but he also made really good plays, like kind of diving both directions.
And he's 6'6",
and he's really big.
So, I mean, if he's a 50 hitter with 70 power, he's not 1-1, right?
I think he's potentially top 3, but again, it's depending on it depends on a lot of things, because we're going to get to this when we talk about like what might the Guardians do.
Right.
I think there's a decent chance that like they price shop their pick and
as they should.
Right.
Yeah. But if he's a 55 hitter with 65 or 70 power, then he is.
For sure,
said, if he's an above average hitter, and with double plus power, he has every right to be the first overall pick, and probably moves relatively quickly through the minor leagues.
You would think so, for sure.
Three home runs in a game earlier this year, where this team got drilled. Was that what happened?
Where say again?
Did they get absolutely slaughtered in that game?
I don't know that I saw the 3 home run game. Maybe that was against Michigan State. I could be wrong though.
I feel like that he had a game where he had home run, but Georgia was just getting drilled.
Oh,
like you don't see that often where he wasn't going to get an at bat, but his team was losing. I don't remember, but he was on the radar, and as he should. So how about this? Now you've given me 2 guys as top 3 hitters. Anybody else, or as under 1-1 consideration? Anybody else under that you would put up in that top tier to be drafted potentially first overall?
So now I'm going to answer your question that you gave me time to think about, because I think this is the one answer that springs to mind right away, like at this early stage, right? So you said, is there anyone who could do like a Jackson Holiday and just ascend? I think there's one guy with superstar potential in this class at the moment. And he's the best prep prospect in the draft right now. And his name's Connor Griffin. He is a prep 2-way player out of Mississippi. committed to LSU, I believe, but he will not go. He's just like an unbelievable athlete. So he's a senior, 6'4", 210. Like one of those like design a player type looking players. He's played 19 games so far this prep season. He's stolen 47 bases. He broke his school's stolen base record like 25% of the way into the season. And like it's really hard for me to like look at prep numbers and be like, ooh, because like we're not experts about what the prep scene is like in Mississippi, right? But through these 19 games, he was hitting 682, 789, 1.227 with 5 home runs and 47 stolen bases. It's like wild tools, right? It's like for sure plus power, plus speed, plus defense in center field, I think is the best defensive fit, plus glove. It's a question about the hit tool and like swing and miss. And that's a big question to have about a prep prospect.
Yeah, for sure.
He's also like up to 97 on the mound. But I think he's most likely a hitter long term. But I think he's the one guy who you might say, if evaluators start to really believe in the hit tool, he's the one guy that could check like all the boxes and be like a superstar player potentially from this class.
So is it is it ridiculous to call him like a mashup between Walker Jenkins and Max Clark?
I think like minus the hit tool, right? Both of them had a really strong hit tool coming out last year. And I think Connor Griffin's is really in question. But yeah, in terms of like a lot of the other stuff, like, yes, Jenkins type power. Yes, Clark type speed, defense, arm. So yeah, there's like definitely elements
Jenkins type makeup.
Yeah, there's definitely like elements of both there. I think that's fair. And I kind of like, we've hated comps, but here's what I'm coming around to. You can comp like certain aspects or tools of guys to other people, like makes me feel a little bit better about doing it. So yeah, I think that's fair. I think the question is, again, like the hit tool, do evaluators believe in it? And Jenkins was getting 60 grades on his hit tool like at the beginning of the cycle last year, and Clark was also like 55, 60. So TBD on Connor Griffin, but I do think he's the one guy who could absolutely skyrocket if he keeps playing really well.
So again, I'm on the MLB page. I pull up Connor Griffin's profile.
Mm-hmm.
I look at him, and when I just glance, I see like a mirror image of Max Kepler. He's wearing 25.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So not exactly, but he's right-handed. But it's just I get the Kepler vibe a little bit, and it's like the tools, like you mentioned, power speed guy, right? Center field. Do you think that he's like getting walked a ton and then just stealing his way to second, stealing his way to third, and like see if you can throw me out if you can? Like the way that I played little league baseball, where players got better, right? Where he's just like toying with people. How do you still 47 bases in 19?
It is crazy. I think he's doing what he wants. Like my question was like, how many at bats are you getting per game to do that? Yeah, I think he's pretty much doing what he wants at this level, right? And so he's hit 5 home runs. I'm guessing he's trying to show off the hit tool and get on base a little bit. Again, like the competition is not good enough for him. So
Right.
yeah, he'll be really interesting to track. Like I said, this is not a super exciting prep position player class. But there are, you know how it is, Jeremy, like there are names that start to emerge in like April and you're like, oh, there's this prep guy who throws 98 and has the most incredible curveball you've ever seen that you'd never heard of like a month ago. And I think that's starting to happen now anyway. So, but Griffin is the guy at the moment.
Okay, so here's what you've done. You've spent the last, let me check here.
Talking myself in circles.
24 minutes talking about hitters. And we love hitters. But last year, Paul Skeens went first overall, and you're like, well, maybe Paul Skeens shouldn't have gone. I'm like, yeah, Paul Skeens absolutely should go first overall. If you can get the ace, you take the ace, because that's what we're all chasing, right? We're chasing the arm. So you're the Guardians. Well, no, The Guardians are there. You're a Twins fan. Okay. All these hitters that you've mentioned, they don't really strike fear into me as a Twins fan.
Mhm.
Pitchers sometimes freak me out because you get that pitcher and all of a sudden it changes things. So,
Mhm.
what are the possibilities that a pitcher works his way up to the very, very top line and here's his name called by the Guardians?
Yeah, that is interesting. Speaking of pitchers, before we dig into these guys, did you see Jackson Jobe pitch against the Twins the other day?
I didn't see. I saw it on Twitter. 100,
Ooh,
102, freaky.
rough stuff. Um,
That's why you take hit. That's why you take the pitchers that can
that's
throw 102 miles an
that's why you
hour.
take the prep right-hander. That's like your demographic that you love and I hate. A win for you for sure.
You got to roll the dice if you want to come up with the right numbers, right?
Yeah. Okay, so pitchers, I think it's still like more likely that a hitter goes number one, but there are. Okay, so let's back up on pitchers for a second. College pitching is much more interesting to me in this draft cycle than last. Last draft cycle, at the beginning of the season, there were a bunch of interesting college pitchers who were just bad or hurt or both and just really like fell down the board. And this cycle, there are a number of college pitchers that are really good, have really loud stuff, and or are off to really awesome starts. So I think that's two guys worth mentioning right off the bat, and we'll dig much more into further down the list on each of these demographics as we get closer to the draft. But Hagen Smith is a guy you've already brought up today. Left-hander out of Arkansas. He's pitched 17 innings so far, 2.12 ERA. He's given up 6 hits, walked 7, and struck out 40 in 17 innings. His fastball's up to 100. Nasty arm slot. The slider has a whiff rate of over 70%. Plays really well off the fastball. He's got that like funky kind of angled 3/4 lefty delivery, like a little bit Josh Hader-ish, right? Where hitters are struggling to pick up the ball. A big question for him coming into the season was command. Like, do you have it? And he's answered it in the early going. And you brought this up. He's played good teams. Like he struck out 17 against Oregon State. That's not a light team. I think the remaining questions for him are like, is there a quality third pitch? He's mixed in a splitter, a changeup, a cutter. I don't know that any one of those is like super consistent yet, and you got to have 3 if you're going to start. So he's guy number 1, and then guy number 2 that I think has a case is Chase Burns, transfer from Tennessee to Wake Forest. He's pitched 23.1 innings, 2.31 ERA, so pretty much identical numbers to Smith. He's given up 14 hits, a little more contact, walked 10, and struck out 43. Like in terms of a 1-2 punch, these guys' stuff is absolutely ridiculous and is like up there at the Skeens level. His fastball's up to 101, 20 inches of ride, and almost no horizontal movement. It's a really unusual fastball shape. He throws a 90-mile-per-hour slider. He also has a changeup, but he throws it like twice per game. Control's been good. Command has been a little bit more spotty. Same question as with Smith. 2 easily plus pitches, but we haven't seen much of a third. And so the stuff and the arm talent is like undeniable for both of those guys. But I think you want to see a more well-rounded arsenal to feel really confident that they can, start their professional career and feel confident that they're going to be starting pitchers, and just to alleviate a little bit of the reliever risk.
As a lefty, Smith just gets the nod here, right? I mean, I watched the Chase Burns stuff from this past weekend was filthy.
So good.
But
so fun.
If you can choose between the lefty and the righty and they're comparable,
yeah,
you take the lefty 100 times out of 100.
I think that 100%. That's a good tiebreaker. I would agree.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, finish the thought here.
No, I was just gonna say, and like these guys are so close right now. Like Smith had one rough outing on his opening day where he only pitched 1 inning, but like looking at their numbers, they're really identical, right? So I'm kind of looking forward to watch me say this and it won't happen. I'm looking forward to someone having a clunker, like someone having a bad outing, seeing how they bounce back, like running into some adversity. What I really want to see is, when are you guys going to, like, are they going to need to throw a third pitch with consistency? Because it's going to be a real bummer and difficult to evaluate where they're going to go. But I would say, for these updated boards that are coming up, I would be surprised if both of these guys weren't firmly in the top 10. Burns kind of already was, but Smith was more in the mid-teens on most people's preseason boards, maybe even early 20s. Absolutely no way he's there now. He's going to be a top 10 guy, most likely, for March, April updates.
So, I mean, both of these guys you mentioned throwing over, fastball up to 100, fastball up to 101. Are they even the highest grade fastballs in the first round right
now? We got to throw one more in the mix there too. It's like unbelievable, dude. Like, and someone asked a great question I'm excited to talk about with you. And looking back at that, prospect scouting reports really made me realize like where stuff has gone in the past 5 years. Brody Brecht, fastball wise, also is definitely up there. He's the starting pitcher for Iowa, used to be a football player, wide receiver there too, is now concentrated solely on baseball. I think his fastball has been up to 102. Jack Caglianone has also been over 100. I think in side sessions and games, he's only been at 99. So it's just like stuff-wise, it's so loud. There's a lot of really interesting pitching prospects that only throw 95, 96 too. So if you're interested in college pitching, and we have talked a lot previously about how the Twins seem to feel like they can get really good value for college pitching and from college pitchers in the mid to late rounds. But if you like good college pitching, this class is shaping up to be much more interesting than 2023, in my opinion.
So one thing that I just want to add here, and it's kind of off topic, but kind of on topic. Well back in the day of like the Twins Fest and Winter Meltdown, we would occasionally have some current and former players show up. And I'm not going to throw this guy's name out because I don't want, this, I'm just not going to. But we were eating breakfast the one morning talking about Cole Stewart. Okay. Mm-hmm. Cole Stewart, high school quarterback, through 96, I think, to maybe 97. But was always like consistently over 93. Mm-hmm. Cole Stewart, big ticket guy. Everybody wanted to watch Cole Stewart pitch, wanted to get in the box against Cole Stewart. And this player who had retired at the time that I was talking to him said nobody made 97 look more like 87 than Cole Stewart. Like, it was so easy to pick up. It didn't move. It didn't do it. There was no like activity on the fastball. It was just fast. And he's like, if you have quick hands, you could turn that around. He's like, the first time I stepped in I took a swing, I hit off the fence. He's like, because 97 turns around in a hurry if you can get bad on it.
Yep.
And so it was just interesting kind of hearing from the perspective of being in the batter's box, right? And so like I'm looking at Brecht's thing, and it says sits at 96 to 99, touches 101 with the heater, which has explosive running action and superior shape to Skeens' fastball. Mm-hmm. Like, who wants to stand in the box for that?
And that's really interesting. I had not heard that story before, and I think that's like something fascinating that ties these three guys together, Brecht and Smith and Burns. And we'll talk more about Brecht down the road because the command is the question with him, and it needs to be more consistent and so on. But all three of these guys have either an interesting fastball shape or a difficult arm angle that makes seeing the ball difficult. And if you're making seeing the ball difficult at 101 miles per hour, hitters don't have that much of a chance.
No, it's like self-preservation, right? Okay, sure. So the $9 and change million question, I guess I haven't seen the draft slots. I don't know what this question is actually worth. But putting you on the spot, because that's the best thing to do, the most fun thing to do. You're running the draft room for the Guardians. It's on you to fix this franchise that's a mess. What are you doing with the first pick that was gifted to you that you cannot
Gifted.
screw up, or your job is you're out. You got to get this right. What are you doing?
They were gifted. Yeah, I can't believe they got the number 1 pick, dude. I think what the Guardians will do is price shop it. So if they're so for anyone who doesn't know what price shopping is, if they see 3 or 4 guys that they evaluate in a similar fashion, right? And say, we think these 3 guys have the same kind of future value as each other. Price shopping the pick just means we're going to kind of farm out the price and sign the guy who will sign for the least, because what we experienced with the Twins last year was one of the massive advantages is not just of moving up in the lottery, it's not just getting a higher pick. It's the financial flexibility that comes with that allowed the Twins to take Charlie Soto and Brandon, like pay way overslot for Brandon Winokur and take more of these high upside plays. So that's what I think they would do. If it was me picking today, I think I would take Bazana.
Okay.
My rationale, off to a really good start. He has a steady kind of track record of improvement. The power tool is emerging to be like at least above average, potentially even better than that. And that wasn't really in the mix last season. And then the prospect of him potentially playing center field, he's certainly athlete enough to do that. I think adds another layer of value there. But if you ask me again in a month, I might give you a different answer. But I think that's
and I think that's fair. They do. The Guardians also have a comp pick in round A, which is going to give them a little bit more money. And I mean, obviously, they have their second round pick. They draft 40th overall.
Mm-hmm.
But you're looking at a team that's going to be able to kind of potentially float a dude down to their second pick if they can price shop well, right? So I mean, we've seen this before, and it doesn't have to be the first overall pick, but you can, like the Marlins did last year pretty successfully, agree to sign a guy at a certain thing, know how much money you have left, and then float a player where you say, hey, we give you $3.5 million and nobody else can,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden that guy's dropping down. The Guardians could certainly do that. I haven't looked close enough at where I feel like teams' draft pools will be, but I feel like there are teams up at the top that could play a game like that, right? And if you
100%.
don't have it's the kind of the football theory, right? Where you can trade down,
Mm-hmm.
right? Would you rather have the first pick or would you rather the third pick and the 18th pick?
Yep.
And when you sort signing bonuses by value, that gives you a better idea of the pick that you had, right? Because you can float your money down to another pick and then sign guy for more, which is essentially trading down to then trade back up.
Yep.
And so I feel like we might get more of that based on where we are right now. Obviously, like you said, everything can change. The one thing that I watch closer than anything in March and April and May is I just don't want to see the tweets that say so and so blew out his arm.
Yep.
Out for the year. Like that to me is the biggest part of college baseball. Like,
for sure.
Can the pitchers make it through the season healthy? Please, God, say yes, because otherwise it screws everything up. Like Dylan Lesko as a high schooler, Hunter Green, kind of late in his high school thing when the Twins were talking about, all of a sudden he shut down. Ultimately, they took Royce Lewis, which is a great pick. But that to me is the biggest story that remains to be written before the draft every year.
For sure. And thankfully we haven't had many kind of catastrophic injuries in college baseball. Certainly not the top of the class yet. I do really want to see Weatherholt get back. He's had hamstring things before this, and so you just don't like to see a guy who's potentially going to be a top 3 pick not get to play, especially when they're moving to a defensive position. But I really liked your point, man, about the financial flexibility. And, one thing I'm excited to do as we get further on in the season is break down the pools and really dig into that, because I think what we're going to see is there are a number of teams that have, or organizations that will have and be able to assert a greater degree of control over the top of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
You've got like the Diamondbacks, right? They have a PPI pick for Corbin Carroll winning Rookie of the Year, and there's all these other things in play that give teams a cluster of picks in that first 40 range, which is really where you want to be living. And that's a lot of why I loved the Brewers also getting a pick as part of the Corbin Burnes trade, because it gives them so much more flexibility on draft day.
Yeah, you mentioned the Diamondbacks, so they'll pick 31st with their PPI pick. They pick 29th overall. So
That's nice.
they're going to have that money, but they're not going to be able to float a top 5 guy.
For sure.
Orioles have 32 for PPI for Gunnar Henderson, but picked 22nd. Gave up that extra pick to get Corbin Burnes, where they maybe would have had a little more.
They don't need any more help in their farm system, man.
But they can take big shots, right? Like, and that's the fun. That's fun, but also kind of the realistic part. Like, if you're a team that has a really, really struggling farm system, and it might be struggling because you have bad drafters, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a realistic thing, but you might be less likely to take that shot on the guy with a high upside and a low floor and just be like, well, we got to go safe. And we've seen teams do that. And every draft class kind of takes on its own life. And so the college pitcher's throwing really fast, really hard. That to me is fun. And I think it's a good segue here into a listener question, right?
Yeah.
So we got one of these. Do you want me to read this one, or do you want to read it? You're going to answer it because you're the expert here.
No, I want to ask you. So I want to ask you what you remember about this prospects. We put out the call for questions, and one heroic listener answered the call for the March draft episode. So TA Marshall, you're a favorite. So his question is this: how does Jack Caglianone compare to past two-way prospects? And he's specifically asking about Brendan McKay, who, if you don't remember, was a prospect drafted by the Tampa Bay Rays. He was a Royce Lewis draft, right? Or am I misremembering that?
He was the Royce Lewis draft.
Okay. And then he says, is it likely a drafting team will try to develop him, this is Caglianone, both ways for as long as possible? So do you remember much about Brendan McKay? I feel like that's really like in the sweet spot of you just like really knowing absolutely everything about the draft, and I was not nearly there yet. So maybe you have a better recall of what he was like as a prospect, like whether folks thought he could play two ways, like realistically, or what was the deal there?
Yeah, 100%. That was the belief. Because that was really the time that I spent the most. Like it was too much time, and it became like overwhelming because you find yourself with information that other people want that you're not really supposed to share, but they know that you know, and that's hard. But with Brendan McKay, it was, well, we can take a guy who's going to be at worst a major league mid-rotation starter.
Mm-hmm.
Who can also DH, pinch hit, potentially play first on the days that he's not pitching. Like it was what you thought, what people suggested Shohei Ohtani could be when everyone thought that was a crazy thought.
Mm-hmm.
Now Ohtani's done it like no one has ever done it or will ever do it again. But that was kind of the bar on a two-way player was really, really low. But for McKay, it was going to be, he is 100% a starter, a mid-rotation guy at worst, who can also hit. And then he got hurt, right? And that kind of set things back. And he got hurt with a team that knew exactly how to handle arms. It was weird. So I would say McKay was a better pitching prospect.
For sure.
A safer pitching prospect, and less of a high ceiling hitter, but a serviceable hitter who could play first base. Mm-hmm. And it made so much sense with a team like the Rays to be the team to do that.
Yep.
And it didn't work out because of because of the injuries. So that's what I remember from him. But I think that this whole Ohtani thing has really kind of gotten people out of control about the idea that you can be a two-way guy. Like Eldridge was going to be a two-way guy for all of how many months?
10 minutes.
So we're just not going to see it. Like teams are not going to do that because it's freaky player. But the problem is that players believe that they can be the next Shohei Ohtani.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to want to be.
So, yeah. So that's great, man. I like needed that refresher. And I did remember parts of what you mentioned about McKay. The thing that I found interesting, and I mentioned it like earlier on when this question came up, was just like the difference in stuff between McKay and Caglianone is wild. Like McKay had a fastball that was like 93 to 95, and that was seen as, I think it was seen as like a plus fastball. Now he had really great command too, but Caglianone throws like 99 and has a plus slider. Similar problems as with some of the other pitching prospects we've talked about, which is there a consistent third pitch? Is there good enough command? But in that way, they're very different pitching prospects. Like McKay was much more polished, great command. I think he had a good cutter. And then he had two other pitches that were kind of more average. I don't know with Caglianone. I think there's like a lot of risk in that profile. I agree with you. Like Ohtani is a unicorn, right? He's a one-off. There's so many guys now. Like on the consensus board, I've added TWP for two-way player as a position this year for the first time. But there's a ton of guys this year, like Connor Griffin. We've talked about Caglianone. Bryce Rayner is another prep guy, and there's a bunch more. Eldridge in the last class you brought up, who said in all the pre-draft build-up, I want to be both. And the Giants are like, nope, you're a hitter. I really don't know about Caglianone. I think that he's probably better as a hitter. But again, it's like a first base profile defensively, which is not that exciting. His chase rate last year was like 40%. I think like there's real risk to that profile on both sides. Like as a pitcher, it's reliever risk. As a hitter, it's are you going to have the bat to ball skills to thrive? And I don't know which one a drafting team is going to pursue. If I had to guess, it would be hitter, but I don't think they'll pursue two-way development.
And he might be the right kind of setup for a two-way guy that can work.
Mm-hmm.
Because you say, "Ooh, there's reliever risk," and for me, I'm saying, well, he's just a reliever, right? He throws really, really hard left-handed, and he throws a slider. So if you can develop him as a eighth inning type guy who can also hit. I don't know how that works within the rules. Like Ohtani can be the starting pitcher, then stay as the DH. Like, can you be the DH and stay at the DH? And then I guess you could enter as a reliever, right? That would be totally fine. Yep. And so I think that the idea of what Ohtani is, which is an absolute freak, which I said, we're not going to see it again.
Mm-hmm.
That Caglianone makes sense as a draft him as a hitter, but keep developing the pitchers not necessarily as a starter, but as a guy that can throw 100 and strike some guys out late in the game. And I think we've seen that with. I mean, you go way back in the day. The Brewers had a guy that was kind of was it Brooks Kieschnick, like way back
before my time. I'd be the fifth.
And Lorenzen did a little bit of that as a relief pitcher and a hitter. Now he's a starting pitcher. So I think that there's the ability to do that, but to full on say you're going to be a full-time hitter and pitch every 5 days, it's too much. Yeah. But I think that you say there's risk, and as a hitter there's risk, and as a pitcher there's risk, but as a hitter with the risk that he has with a backup plan to be a dominant relief pitcher, there's a little bit less overall risk, right?
And so that makes sense. I like your way of framing it.
And he's also doing it in the best conference in America, which is different than doing it in the Big Sky.
For sure. Right? I like your way of framing it a lot, actually. Like just questioning the idea that like a two-way player has to be a starter, I think is important. And you're right about Kegley, you know, like proven track record of performance in a really difficult conference. And he's shown better command and I think a little bit more like clean mechanics this year. And so he has a whole 3/4 of a season left to show continued development with the pitching. So I do think, to TA Marshall's question, that he is the one profile in this class that would classify as a two-way player who is still kind of like blurry, like maybe you could make it work, to your point. I'll go with that.
I would still put him significantly lower than McKay at this time of their junior years of college, though. Even though it didn't work out for McKay, his stuff is better, sure, but it's just way different. And I hope it works out, because I think those types of things make turning on the TV a little more interesting. But yeah, we'll see. It's still early, man. There's still 4 months of things that are really bad that can happen to a lot of people.
I know, for real. All right, we're gonna wrap it up, but let me plant this seed for next time, because I haven't told you what I'm planning on us doing next time around.
Okay.
So I think I'm just gonna drop it on you so you can't back out. So next week we'll drop another draft episode where you and I will take turns in drafting a top 6 prospects from the 2024 draft class to see who can come up with the most compelling squad.
Okay. Top 6.
You're gonna pick 6. You're gonna pick 6 guys, and I'm gonna pick 6 guys, and we're gonna use the consensus board that we haven't released to the public yet to make the best possible team of prospects from 2024 draft eligible guys. So you're going to pick your best 6. I'm going to pick my best 6. We're going to take turns and see who can come up with the most impactful squad.
Do we have position requirements? No.
Well, we can argue about that offline. To be decided. To be decided. But it'll be a fun thought exercise, and I figured that's like the logical follow-on conversation from this, right? To help people get familiar with the kind of top 15, top 20 in a way that we ended up today saying we're going to talk about 1-1. We talked about like 15 guys. We'll kind of do the same and fold in a few more guys next week.
Okay. Love it.
All right. That's been super fun. You can tell producer Theo isn't here because we're way over time. So we'll call it a day. And we'll catch you guys next week. Until then, take it easy.